Today we will look at ecosystem analysis, and the reason is, of course, as we also mentioned last time, that these innovation that we want to create, we want to improve mobility, in many ways, and these innovations that we create to improve mobility will be embedded in existing systems. So it's an infrastructure. It's also in many ways a system of economic activities, economic incentives and interests, etc., and goals that needs to be aligned for the systems to work, for the system to work well. Repetition. What's the definition of customer value? This is something you should know if I wake you up in the middle of the night. It's actually customer resources. It's fundamental, and we need to be able to divide these things, these two major contributor up in components, so we can engineer value a little bit more with precision. And yeah, so let's go into a little bit about ecosystems now. So we'll talk about ecosystems, what they are, and we'll relate a little bit to unicorns. This is not a unicorn course, but I mean, there is a connection there. So many unicorns are transformative for an ecosystem. So I wanted to just show that part, and then we have the challenge of ecosystem description and analysis. And you read the paper now on platforms with a lot of different described ecosystems. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Now I'm trying to move on to another way of describing them that is much more in line with how we describe functions in products. Then we will do an exercise which will be creative, so I think you'll like that. I hope we'll have time to do it well, and that will be a prediction of what ecosystems will look like moving forward. And that's the really interesting thing. If you want to innovate, you don't want to innovate against today's ecosystem, but in the ecosystem of tomorrow, what could be the pockets of profit or the real value that we can contribute, so we aim for the right thing. And that's very much in line with the videos and discussions we had last time, the pre-assignments. Right. So an ecosystem is a metaphor of symbiosis, right? So there is a concept of synergy and a concept of symbiosis. And symbiosis means that different parts of a system can get fed by other parts, but they also contribute, so you can see this a lot in nature. So it's a metaphor from nature, a metaphor from biological systems. They are very complex in the sense that there's a lot of elements in them, a lot of species and a lot of different factors to consider, and they are also nested quite a lot. So what one thing does affects the other, shapes the living condition. And the ecosystem is also evolving, so it changes over time. It's not static, it changes and becomes something different. So it's alive in a sense that it's not stable. The forces might be stable in some sort of equilibrium, but it's not that nothing happens. There's a dynamic going on that can affect how the system develops over time. Now, you can criticize this, but that's not go into that. So an example, if you look for ecosystems, you can look at the Stockholm Tech ecosystem, for example. And now we come into a problem, because the term ecosystem is used for different kinds of things in business as well. And we'll look a little bit on that. But this is what we can call a innovation ecosystem. It's more of a cluster of all sorts of things that, if they're put in the same geographic area, or if you put all these ingredients in the same pot and boil it, it tastes really good and becomes more than the parts. That's the synergy. It becomes more than the sum of the parts, right? So we have education and research. There is co-working spaces and angel investors, and without a mechanic to force these to interact, just the fact that they are there, they interact, and they occupy the same living space will make meetings happen, connections to form, investments to be agreed, and all that. So that would be an innovation ecosystem. It's not exactly what we are looking for deeper today, but it's very relevant also for thinking about urban mobility situation. If we want to develop something, what would be a good environment to do that in? Sweden is a good environment for some things, Stockholm, Sweden. Maybe for other things, there'll be Berlin or Toronto or whatever, So where is the right need? Where is the right capabilities? The right competences? And very important for this is the activity of entrepreneurship itself feeds talent into the system. So one thing that is special with Silicon Valley is that there are so many people with startup experiences as founders, as key persons, and so on. Failed attempts, successful attempts, really successful attempts make people rich also, so they become angel investors. So there's just more entrepreneurial people, skilled entrepreneurial people, and you become skilled. Even if you fail or if you succeed, doesn't matter, you learn anyway. So there is just maybe the factor that's most difficult to replicate is the result of previous entrepreneurship. So you can create a lot of this, but you need to have that also in it. So a little bit of background. So we had a background piece on business models, and here is a background piece on ecosystems. It was actually Porter started in the 1982. He made a model for describing what the determinants of competitive intensity here in the middle of an industry. An industry is a set of actors that are doing something. Let's say they make bikes. In the marketing definition of industry, that would be the makers of bikes. In the strategy field, we think of an industry that also includes suppliers, buyers. There's some threat of entrance at least. There's some substitutes like kick bikes or mopeds, and complementors that would be service providers or equipment providers and whatnot. And what happens in these boxes has a strong impact on the rivalry in here. So if the buyer power is very strong, which is maybe the simplest example, we have to compete intensely as bike manufacturers, because they can play us against each other and say, I can buy your bike, but I want a discount. I want to have a bike for my friend, and I buy two for my family. So they're buying power. The power of bargaining is high. If it's low, on the other hand, it's easier for us. Same with suppliers. And then this one is mostly about how difficult it is for someone to start a company or to enter into the industry. If that's easy, that will also increase rivalry here. And complementors is not only bad, but that has to do with, can this technology that we rely on, so we talked about functions, right? So the function that our product has, can that be done with a better technology, cheaper, for example, or lighter, or whatever? That's a problem. So there's a high threat of substitution. And this is, of course, a dynamic view. So this is maybe a limitation of the five forces model, which is called the darker boxes. If, let's say, there is a nice comfortable industry here. We have low bargaining power from customers, like in telecom. To be a telecom operator, you have to put base stations all over the country. It's a high entry barrier. It's a high entry barrier. It's for the customers. If they want to have an internet connection on their phone, there's a couple to choose from, but it's not like they can really have a strong impact. If there's a lot of competitions, because we in the industry compete very hard to get a lot of customers, but they don't have so much power. Yeah, so profits in telecom used to be 30-40% profit margin, right? That's pretty good. You know, in construction or transport, it's usually 1 digit. But of course, if there is a lot of profit here, we'll attract new entrants, right? So there's a dynamic going on. So, you know, at some point, they will start building base stations, or they will rent capacity from our competitors' base stations and things like that. So this is not a stable situation. Okay, so this is something we can talk a lot about, but we want to move on. And it was anyway the first, it came out in 1980, it was the first framework for analyzing your business environment that was having some structure. So that's interesting. And it also came with, or from the same author, and in a compatible reasoning, they started to talk about the value chain. And we can see that here as a vertical, where we have upstream, we have the suppliers, they make metal, they make rods, and they make tires. And then we have the makers here of bicycles. And then we have the buyers, or we can even have wholesale and retail and buyers. So that will be a whole value chain. And usually value chains are drawn left to right. But in industry analysis, we talk about verticals, because then you have the moped vertical here. And the maker of tires might make tires for both verticals, but they have different retailers, for example. And that is a basis for discussing our strategic options. Should we move forward in the value chain? So that's forward integration. Maybe we should make bikes and have bike wholesale, for example. That makes you able to capture a little bit more of the end price tag that the customer sees, which is 1,000. And instead of making the bike and can take up 200, maybe we can take 250. Right, by taking another part of the value adding activities. Oh yeah, so in the strategy course, this is something that we could discuss maybe for a whole class. But this is embedded in a more bigger environment, more what we call meta factors that influence the whole country, the whole region, and the conditions under which we do strategy, under which we do business. So that has a lot of drivers, and we used to have 4 drivers: political, economic, social, and technological. And then they shape what happened before and what's going to happen in the future. So the development here is path dependent, and these are the path constraints or path enablers that not determines but influence that process. Now we often have two more. So this is political, economic, social, technological. So that's the PEST framework. Have you heard about that? Oh yeah, so it's a very famous model. Now sometimes we add 2 more, EL, which is environmental and legal. All right. And that will be very relevant for this course, because environmental driver is extremely important, and we'll talk about that next week with Staffan Stadius. But of course the legal and regulatory part is also very, very important, both as a constraint and a driver. It can constrain what we do, but it also force force other actors in the ecosystem, like regular citizens, into something different. That will help us maybe if we can supply that differently. It looks like you have a question.
Yeah, because when we were watching the TED talk from Professor Jacobidis, he was talking about how corruption would like kind of like prevent some good things from happening, from creating value. For example, in Greece, when some operators become really aligned with the political situation, and then what you do is you don't create any new competitors, so you just let one person win everything what is on the table, right? And I just wanted to ask, from your point of view, as you know it, the ecosystem in Sweden or in Stockholm, what would you say that which of these forces is playing the most, like the highest barrier?
Yeah, are we talking about telecom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You have to have a license to use, to start transmitting on the spectrum. And that's the same all over the world. It's regulated. The spectrum is a bottleneck really for mobile communication. Um, but you can also co-opt with other actors and use their license or operate on their networks, etc. So what would be
Mm.
the major constraint? I think it's probably economic here. It's a business case mostly. What will it cost? How much can we make? Um, I don't know how it is now because the margins they were decreasing for 10, 15 years for telecom operators. But it used to be that you could start a mobile operator, become this virtual operator which uses another network. And once you came up to 100, 200,000 customers, the big ones were, starting to be concerned and they bought you. And then you could start another operator. So there was some serial entrepreneurs that just had the business idea of starting mini virtual operators and selling them to the big players. So it's not too difficult to do. It's just maybe effort getting, because you can get money, but you have to have a return on investment. So what is it costing to get money from the bank, and how much margin can I get when I do it? That's the game you play basically. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so this has been criticized for being a bit static, not taking the mechanics into account. And what happened was that more and more we started to see that businesses operate in collaboration. Even competitors collaborate. They can be competitors in facing the market, but on the technology side, they might collaborate for the next generation, for mobile operators and equipment makers. They want to have a standard. So now we have 5G. I'm thinking about 6G, etc. And that's because it's in the infrastructure. So we can't innovate freely. We have to take into account that it will have to work for everybody. The value hinges on it being a common standard. Otherwise, it will be, and that's why nobody wants to own the technology. I mean, nobody wants to own 5G because it should be available for everyone, and that's something that comes with. I mean, this might be a license fee or something, but it's basically free to use, because if someone charges for it, that would be an incentive to develop 5G2 or 5GB, or so now you have competing standards, and we don't want that when we look at infrastructure creation. But because we have a stronger competitive pressure generally, we shouldn't exaggerate that, but business world have become more dynamic, more fast changing, and more competitive due to globalization mostly. And we have technology, especially digitalization and internet, enabling us to do more real-time collaboration and connect parts of our operations with each other. It has led to companies becoming more and more prone to build something together and offering it to the market. Right? And you see that all the time. If you go into the ICA store, they will offer you, when you get your Swedish personal number, you can get a card and pay with a Visa, and you get points. But of course, there's a bank side on that, and then you can get an insurance and so on. In the case of ICA, I think they have the bank and the food store, but often, we build it together with offerings from different service providers and go under one brand, which is called bundling. And we saw bundling in the S-curve also as something that happens both in the initial growth phases and in the more stagnant phase. Anyway, so one example is simple. Apple. We have Apple. They make the phones. They make the operating system. They provide the app store. Then they have developers providing all the stuff into the app store. And you can put in here also network suppliers. Those that give you network access. And all that is needed for it to work. You have no use for your phone if there's no network, no apps, etc. So it's complementary actors that all add to the usefulness of the product, which we can call a platform. So an Apple phone is a platform, right? And in the case of Apple, you also need a lot of makers of adapters, so it will work with normal equipment. That is one of the biggest growing businesses for the Apple ecosystem, all the adapters and cables and stuff. And in the center, so we can see this. There are many ways to slice up this ecosystem pie, but now we talk about the business ecosystem, not an innovation ecosystem. So innovation ecosystem is more like a cluster. There's factors that make this region more dynamic, usually connected to some technical direction. So in Stockholm-Kista, we have an ecosystem that results in a lot of digital innovation. In other places, you can have maybe more of a medtech cluster, etc. Here we're more looking at a specific business model in the center, like the Apple ecosystem is about the phone and the use of the phone. So it comes together, the value network here in the middle comes together and co-produces a customer-facing value proposition. And that is a definition that is much more restrictive than in a cluster. In a cluster, they can do lots of different things, lots of different products and services and so on. Here we call it the ecosystem if there is a customer-facing value proposition towards which all the other activities are synchronized. So you get that difference. It's about one, let's say, product or service that unites many different actors. And that's how you talk about business ecosystems. Now, to make matters worse, they started to call this innovation ecosystems now recently in the research, but that you don't have to concern yourself too much with that. You can talk about the value network. Value network is the actors doing value together. You can talk about a value structure. That's the functions provided by the actors to get value to the customers. So we'll look at that a little bit later, but there are basically three different ways to illustrate this central part. Yeah, so then you can talk about an outer, more distant part that are enablers like investors and laws, government agencies, regulation, And then, of course, there's something in the border between the inner central value-adding actors and the more enabling outer. And that border you can span out to become a part of analysis also. So it depends on how many layers of analysis do I really need here. But when we go into discussing business models in the next lecture, we'll look at this, and then we'll just add whatever in the outside are driving or inhibiting our business model. Okay, what else can we say about this? The customers are also part of the ecosystem. That's very important to remember. Sometimes they are even co-producers. So let's say we talk about YouTube. The viewers are also massively adding to the content. So they are also co-producers. And then maybe the customer could also be advertisers. So there might be two layers of customers there. So this is what becomes a bit tricky when you go into business models. They are all unique. They are all exceptions from the standard framework. But that's okay. That's what makes it difficult to compete. It's not the access to some resource, to use that word, that someone has, that usually is the source of a competitive advantage of Apple. Apple doesn't have a resource that it relies on for competition, really. It's more how the whole thing is configured. And over time, these networks become increasingly complex and more tightly integrated and stronger. They are able to produce more advanced benefits and use less resources in, relative to before. I mean, just by adding new technologies and developing the company and all that. So over time, they get a competitive advantage. So competitive advantage is a result of building a stronger configuration of activities. Is this reasonably clear? I'll show you some more examples.
Yes, but I don't understand the part in which if they have altogether a value proposition, right? And they are like aiming at like coordinating activities towards a customer, creating value for this customer. There is a part in which you stated that that means that like the actions of one operator or of one agent can also affect the whole ecosystem. And well, to me, sometimes it's not so clear. Like, can you elaborate a little bit more on that one?
Yeah. So this is two things here. For first thing, this coordination, it could be partly implicit. So Apple doesn't tell developers what to do. They just provide the rules and the platform for upload and download. And they take a little bit of money, but there's also this payment structure, which is very important infrastructure of that ecosystem. So that coordination can be more implicit or more explicit, and with contracts, etc. And then the second part was how different parts of the system where they take action can influence how it develops. Well, I think there's a mismatch in the analogy here, because in an ecosystem, there might be a top predator, for example, like having a strong position, sort of. But in these systems, there's often a leader. In clusters, there might not be a leader. It might be that they have an association of medtech companies development forum or something like that. That could be very common in technology-based clusters. But here is often like Apple is the leader. They own the platform. So the platform owner is the leader. And that means that, of course, an app developer can make an app, but the platform owner is takes a lot of steps to ensure that while this system is flexible, I will not lose control over it. I will decide how it will work and how it could develop. So there is not the same thing as a natural ecosystem. Even the top predator can die if things change there. They're not having power as much as they are, just the end of the food chain. And there's not so much collaboration in nature. It just happens to be that way because everything that didn't fit died. So it looks coordinated, but it's not actively coordinated. I don't know if that answered your question, but we can see, of course, that let's say that a component manufacturer, that will be somewhere here, changes so that you can have, in practice, unlimited memory in the phone. Then maybe you could store all the videos you like and have that with you instead of streaming, for example. That would influence the system. But it's just I'm trying to think about an example. So it can happen, but it's not an equal distribution of influence and power, for sure.
Okay.
And owning the customer relationship, if you read the paper, it's a very important point to own that revenue. The function connected to the connection of revenues is important to own, because there's usually only one point. Maybe if you have an advertising model, there might be 2 points, but then you control the money for the whole rest of the ecosystem, which you sort of have behind you, and controlling the money makes you in power, basically. You can state rules if you can control who gets the money. You can't do everything you like. You can't take 99% because nobody will volunteer, but you can choose if you want 20 or 40, etc. So it's a strong position. Good. All right, so this was supposed to be an introduction, but we covered a lot of details also. So let's look at these unicorns. So I like to talk about unicorns and their ecosystems. I'm actually planning an article about that, because unicorns is, of course, an animal, so the biological metaphor is preserved. So what is a unicorn? You know what a unicorn is?
It's a company, a startup normally, that became very, very valuable in a very short time.
Yeah.
Because they provide some product that no one can compete with them in value.
It's reaching $1 billion evaluation, US dollar. And normally, I looked at this actually during the summer. So short time here could be 10 years, right? So it's not like in 2 weeks. I think the record is 18 months. The average is about 8 years or something like that. Yeah. So they need an ecosystem, because if you have to build something from scratch, let's say we invent a new product, like new kind of roller skates, powered roller skates. That would be something that customer are not used to buy and use. So we have to have that whole innovation diffusion cycle with a chasm potentially, not necessarily because it's a consumer product, so that's not as difficult as business to business products. There are no resellers of this product. Maybe we can convince the sports vertical, or we could maybe go into health. I don't know what not. There's not that. All that has to be made, and manufacture doesn't exist, so we have to make somebody manufacture it. Is there regulations? It's a lot to build. So often when you have a unicorn, it's more that there is an ecosystem, and this is usually the case. There's always something happening in the market. There's a market alternative, what customers are doing and using today, almost always. And I think a very good example is payment again, right? So people are paying each other money, and that is a difficult thing to do. So we can project that with a digital and internet connectivity, maybe more secure things like blockchain, somebody could do this much easier. It's just a matter of confirming identity and ensuring that the transactions are verified, and so on. It's not easily solved, maybe technical problems, but we can see that it will be 10 times better than what we're doing today, or used to do, like entering somebody's account number and sending money coming out tomorrow, their different currencies, all that stuff. So something that will be 10 times better, it's really creating a vacuum effect, that there is a possibility to do something and it has a lot of value. Someone will do it. It's like attracting investment and activity. And this is how unicorns work. They try to find something where there is already, hopefully, a massive scale of value creation, but it could be a transformation. Maybe two functions can be combined. Maybe a function can be done using a much more efficient technology, and so on. And that analysis is what we will do later. So unicorns look for a broken or ineffective ecosystem, tries to see if we apply this technology that we see coming today on this ecosystem, what will it look like in the future? And then, is there some part here which is brand new, or where a player that has a lot of the transaction volume does something that we can do much better, much simpler, much cheaper, faster, etc. So an example, the customer, so as a customer, we as individuals, we already live in a little ecosystem. We have our own things around us and connection to other things, and use some services, know some people, have certain amount of money in a certain bank, etc. So we have an ecosystem of stuff and services that satisfy our life needs. And let's say we need to go to the airport or something. So we source that from a taxi company, right? We call the booking thing. The taxi company has the functions of booking, car fleet, payment, very important payment function, right? It's the point of revenue collection for the ecosystem. And then they have employed drivers, but they also have affiliated drivers. And this little ecosystem can take us to the airport. We don't care so much about all this stuff. We just want to get to the airport. We don't care about functions and solutions and so on. And we care about how much we have to pay and how well it works. So this is the solution level of the network. It's the solution part of the ecosystem. What we looked at when we did the map, the subsystems, and they have the function that connects to each other and so on. All right, so we can use that. But maybe someone looks at this and say, this is not efficient. You have to have a lot of management of a car fleet and drivers, etc. Maybe we can use all the thousands and millions of people that have cars. So what could we do? Well, using drivers that we don't employ, they drive when they want to work, and we pay them when they do work. We don't have to pay them when they don't work. So they could do driving, and so they provide the driving that transports the customer, who saves a little bit of money. And what is needed then? Well, why can't regular people drive taxi? Well, in some cities they have to have a license, but okay. But there is no way for them to get the bookings, and there's no way for people to trust a stranger, and there's no way for people to easily pay another fellow citizen for a service like this, unless they want to have cash, which is a little bit. Then if they use cash, I mean, you can stand on the side of the street with $100 bill, and if someone stops, but it's difficult for us who want to make a unicorn to get part of that bill because we'll not own the transaction. We want to own that revenue point, right? So we can build a platform which serves these three major problems. This is the function of who would pick up who where, you know, the call that, yeah, booking stuff. We could have the trust issue because you can rate the drivers, you can, you know, be rated as a passenger as well. And we have the payment function embedded into a function, embedded into a platform. And everybody has their own phone, so we can put that in an app. So it's available everywhere, irregardless of time and place. So that's a really good thing. People already have the hardware. That's why we want to make apps, because we can make the program and they have the hardware already. That makes it very scalable. If we had to make something they put in the car, Uber wouldn't work very well. Okay, so what happens? Well, a value network needs to be set up. So we have the platform, we have some drivers, the booking thing, the customers, and so on. These are the actors coordinating to produce the value proposition. And on the effect level, there will be a systemic effect, self-reinforcing cycle. There is a demand for cheap transport. Low cost makes us able to sell transport to this demand. High availability, yeah, that's because we have many more drivers than any taxi company can ever employ, right? And then because they are not employed, they work on a commission basis, so it's scalable. We can take on more drivers. I mean, you can take on all the people in the world, but you know, the limiting factor is the demand here, really. So yeah, so that drives low costs, drives a high, interacts with a high demand, high availability. You can have a scalable business, and it's all enabled by this platform and the drivers that are exogenous, right? The drivers are exogenous, and then we have the customers that want to be transported between different places, also exogenous. Or you can have, if you want to add them to the business model or not, is how do you do the border condition? But the border condition for the ecosystem certainly includes both the drivers and the customers. So this is what we want, a self-reinforcing cycle that enables growth. And if we could do that without step cost, you know what the step cost is? So if you make cars, you can produce 1,000 cars, 10,000 cars, 100,000 cars, but then you have to make a new line in the factory. So then you have to invest $1 billion to make 100,001 cars. So that's a step cost. You want to, if possible, design your business model so it doesn't have step costs. And then also, you want to avoid the bottlenecks. And here a bottleneck would be the number of drivers. So that very cleverly sources that to the whole population on the planet that has a driving license. So that bottleneck is designed away from the business model. And if you use a canvas, it's more difficult to make these design or make these scalability decisions and so on, I think, because it's more about the categories of things rather than how they interact. So I prefer to have this system view. And if in the conditions for the ecosystem that exist has sufficient unrealized value, right? So taking a taxi is expensive, so a lot more people would use it if it wasn't so expensive. So it's not at all taking care of the overall societal problem of people transporting. Actually, would like people to take more taxis so there will be less personal cars needing parking and all that. So that means that if we can do something where the service, the value proposition has a cost that is, let's say, 20% of what it used to be, it might actually restructure the whole ecosystem. So that we call about, so that transformation, we call it disruption sometimes. Often disruption is not complete. Uber hasn't disrupted the taxi business. A lot of taxis still around, and a lot of taxis also drive for Ubers, and so that's an interesting development. I don't know if that's only in Sweden. Yes.
Yeah, one question, because there's a debate around Uber, because Uber has existed for many years, but still their business is not profitable because they are gaining market share through very low prices. So this is the value they are like creating right now at this moment is not a sustainable value, because in the future the prices will increase at some point for them to be profitable. So it is like I don't know how to interpret this, but they are
Yes.
very criticized.
Yeah, this is a specific example, of course, but if you want to grow fast, you usually have to have a low price, right? Or be for free, that's even better. But on the other hand, it costs a lot of money to grow, because even though you don't have to employ drivers now, you have to set the thing up in different countries. You have to employ people in these countries to do all the administrative things, to do customer service and so on. So it's far less people than maybe an old service had to employ, but it still takes a lot of money to build it up. And while you do that, you will have an increasing volume, but with low revenues. So usually when growing, these companies are not profitable. So the question is, in the long run, whatever that means, when they are reaching their goals, maybe to be in 100 countries or whatnot, they invest less in growth. Will then the revenues cover the more fixed costs that they have to operate, or not? Do they have to raise prices? That would be a problem, I think. I don't know the answer here for this particular case, but it's often that you want to grow faster than your revenues will enable you to do, and that you do by taking in external money, of course. So that's the whole venture capital game.
And in some cases, or in many cases, taxi service is regulated, so prices are regulated. So they cannot, like people or taxi companies, they can't really compete with Uber, since they are subject to a regulation, a law, while Uber is like not competing in a fair way, right, with them, because they don't have these kind of restrictions.
Yeah, they don't have the restrictions, they don't have the unions, and all that. They don't have demands on how many hours can they drive before they have a break, etc. I think that varies a lot. Yeah. So anyway, this is the idea. Do something at order of magnitude better efficiency. Then you might be able to affect the ecosystem, even though it's an effective existing ecosystem with customers and suppliers, maybe even an infrastructure. But it takes this very high level of activity using some sort of a solution, a function that is important for a lot of people. It should be done in an ineffective way today. We need to be able to do it using technology and other resources much more effective, maybe cheaper, maybe better, usually cheaper. And then we need to be able to scale it up and break into the regulations, the political, economic, social, and technological factors. This is the pest analysis. You often look at that when you want to go into a new business or a new market. Well, are we able to operate? under those conditions. If that is the case, and we have this nice self-reinforcing model without step costs, yeah, that's nice. You have synergies on the need, the product, the business system, and what the ecosystem conditions are. That would be a good box set to tick off before you go for unicorn strategy. So when we analyze ecosystems, we can use that fact that they are directed to a value propositions. They are collectively creating value. And if you remember the value model, that means that we can think of it as functions provided. So some functions are actually getting transported, the customer, the Uber transports the customer, that's a function, so that's pretty easy. But the platform coordinates the driver. The app manages payment. All right, so there are lots of functions here. And according to the value model, you can only create value by providing functions. And it seems that because it works for both products and services, it should be possible to apply it on a multi-actor structure. So that's my contribution to the strategic analysis of ecosystem. You can see the value structure of the ecosystem in a similar way as you do with a product or service. So it's just that the subsystems might be an entire company, right? And they also have a function for the ecosystem. Visa has the function of charging and aggregating and managing the payments and the cash flow. So just background to how this is done in my paper that you read. So this is from Jan Markendal and Per Andersson's paper, and they looked at internet on trains and described it as a number of activities, which I would call functions, because function is more precise than activity. You have to do a lot of activities. You have to clean the office tables, and you have to do salary payments. All that is not interesting for the value creation. But if you give access to a network, then you provide a function, right? We don't care about all the rest of the stuff, how they train their personnel and all those activities. So functions makes it much easier to focus on what's relevant. So we have these functions when we want to provide internet access. So there's a backbone capacity that's connecting to the major big internet in the world, and then the access network, that's what's around you that your device connects to more directly. The provisioning is more on, I think, verifying that you log in, or the system knows who you are and that you paid, etc. So managing that access gratification. The site needs to operate. The customers need to be, you have to sell it. You have to get customers to sign up. There has to be a charging and billing, and then this ID, trust, etc. function. So these are needed, and if you do it like this, that the train operator, the train is the site, they have travelers, so if you're not on the train, you wouldn't use this service, so it's smart if they do the customer acquisition. Just offer it with the ticket. Do you want internet when you go on the train? And this and that is also connected to being on the train. And then there has to be some sort of internet to connect to, because you're not too interested in being connected to the other train passengers, more like I want to watch Netflix, work, or whatever. And then payment, you can use someone here, like a credit card company. So we have functions, and how you bundle functions within a firm boundary, like this is one kind of company, usually has these functions. this kind of company usually have these functions. So that I would describe as roles. And so there's functions and bundles of functions that are typical, means that there is a role in the ecosystem. So this will be ecosystem, sort of simple ecosystem for internet on trains. But if we circle it another way, we can have a site owner that is not a train company. That means it would probably be something standing still. And we can ask the operator to have the access network, means the internal Wi-Fi or Pico stations that use mobile connectivity, but for a small, short-range area. They take care of the access and so on. And then there is ID Trust and billing charging that could be. So that means that together with Telia or Vodafone or something like that, we can do hotspots in, let's say, shopping malls. Exactly the same functions, but how we put them into roles shift. So this is very interesting, because if you look at activities or resources or some other fluffy concept, it's hard to just shift how things are boxed and come up with a completely different alternative of doing the business. So for creativity, this is very effective. What is the essential parts that needs to take place? Okay, let's do it. Let's change how, let's split it on some other dimension into different roles. All right, okay, this could work for schools. How many schools are there in Sweden? Probably, I don't know, 20,000? I have no idea. Universities in the world, that's about 20,000, I think. So it becomes a very useful design tool for business ideas, right? So that's one advantage. Another advantage is that you can see how these functions connect across the roles. Often, you know, over time, as I said, the configuration of how you do things, etc., that's all underlying function now, but underlying the functions are the activities and the assets. How they develop over time makes these roles pretty stable. And here's a telecom. We used to have big national telecom operators that did everything: mobile telephony, internet, and backbone, and then fixed line phone operations. However, the risk is that someone just says that this can be done without all these resources that are underlying here. You don't need to build a network of cables to help people make phone calls, because the network is already there, and that is content agnostic. Digital media is content agnostic. The wires and the servers and the routers don't know if you're sending a video or a blockchain currency, or it just ships everything. So of course Skype put the functions of calling, messaging, and mobile into the application layer instead of the resource layer. They lifted it out and made it easier for the customer, and could do it for free. We still have the telecom operators, because someone has to shift and replace cables when they get broken and all that. But between 2016, well, it was a 3-year period, they lost like $300 billion in revenues to WhatsApp and Skype. And Skype, they made 10 million. So it took 10 billion revenue and made 10 million, but for Skype, so it's a very small company, that was pretty good, So it's really disaster for the telecom operators and the tens of thousands of people employed there.
But this, because I had thought about it, because you said like when there is like some reconfiguration of, like, how to put it, like where value is lost for one competitor, it is gained by another normally. So they change the functions, right? And so you can say, you are saying that this change of value from the hands of one to the other can be disproportionate, like completely off the charts.
Yeah, if there is a disruption, a lot of the value is really what the customer value is the same basically, but Skype you don't have to have phone numbers because you have all your contacts in a list and you can reach anybody in the whole planet. So that's actually much better than phone books and things like that. But these functions, so the functions remain, right? There's still mobile calls, messaging, fixed voice, international voice access, and the revenues. Well, they didn't have any revenues back then, but it is the customer-facing things that they want, right? That's where the strategic power lies to eventually get revenues, and you can control everything else. So they just took it. Some functions may go out, but many times a lot of them still remain. And here you can say that they added the function of organizing the people of the world for you, so you could find them more easily. Nobody knows anybody else's IP address, right? So why would you have to memorize phone numbers? Already when we had ICQ, which was, I don't know, 96 or something, so that was a little message thing that I had on the desktop computer. So you can see, oh, someone is up.
To listen.
Yeah, this is a messenger. And I already then I said this phone number thing is gonna go away. So this is a disruption. But if you apply technology, you have to change the business model also. If you take a Skype and then send a monthly invoice to customers, it doesn't really change for the customer's point of view very much. So it just be a worse quality of the calls, and you still get more noise and so on. So it doesn't make this huge delta of utility that you want. That getting a Uber for 100 instead of taxi for 500, and I can see where it is, so I can really know when I need to go out and put my shoes on and all that. That's a shift in utility that makes a difference for me, because I have a market alternative. I already have the number to Taxi Stockholm in my phone, so I'm not changing for just a small improvement usually. I want a pretty big improvement. And here it often is that you need to change the business model to get that improvement. Just changing the technology is usually not sufficient. This is what the operators will do. They will try to use IP telephony, which is called when you do it digitally, and still send the monthly invoice, because they don't want to change their business model. And that's why they fail when a new one come in and have a different business model. It's very, very predictable. It's typical response. So we're gonna go into an exercise, and we're gonna use something from the foresight literature. So over time, things become more uncertain, right? The time frame increases uncertainty. If we try to have an idea about what's going to happen or how things are going to be, things are connected in so many ways and in such a long series of effects that it becomes very difficult to say what's going to happen. So predetermination, well, there is an inertia in the system and a path dependence. So I can predict that I will be in this room in 5 seconds from now, right? Because I can't really move that fast. So predictability can be high for the short term, but it rapidly decreases. So forecast is when we have mechanisms are stable in relation to the length of the time frame, so we can say that it's reasonable to assume that we will have, for example, tomorrow we will have 20 degrees and sunny. The best predictor for weather is the weather today. The weather tomorrow is 60% likely to be the same weather as today. But what weather it will be around Christmas, which is 4 or 5 months from now, very little to do with the weather today. But there's still some predictability because the Earth is the Earth tilt and so on, so it will be colder. We can have a range of probability. It's sort of predetermined, and the weather 10,000 years from today, it's very difficult to say. But then, of course, here we have a part where it's completely impossible, right? And then in between here, we can say something about what would be plausible, yeah? So plausible for weather next week or next year could be that we have either a rainy summer or a very sunny summer, and then we have a mix. Then we have 3 scenarios, and we can plan. We don't predict, but we think that these options pretty much cover the space of likely outcomes. And if we make a plan that would work in a rainy summer, a sunny summer, and a mixed weather summer, we have a robust strategy. It works out well regardless of the conditions around us. So that's what we do with foresight. We try to frame ourselves to make better assumptions. So going with foresight is usually a creative thing. And as a warm-up for the real exercise, you will get this challenge. And this is method, this first warm-up, and the method that we will use is developed by my colleague Martin Wendel. And there will be in the course web, you have a paper that we wrote that includes it. But anyway, this is something to discuss over a short break. Christina Rodriguez resigned from her job as an executive in the car rentals to start her own company. She bought a number of small dry cleaning and bookstores. Right, so what was her idea? How did she improve the profitability of dry cleaning bookstores, the things she made, how was that more profitable than those original activities? That's right. Any other? Right. So anyway,
that was not the idea.
No, this is just made up. She doesn't exist.
Okay.
So the idea was to illustrate that if you believe that something already happened, you can be much more creative. Right? So if I was to tell you how to make a business idea with some constraints, you would come up with maybe some. But if you believe something has already happened, it'd be like, whatever can it be? And you put together lots of different combinations and try to see what is it really that is the configuration here that makes it more profitable, etc. So it's a psychological trick, and this is what we will use for our little workshop. So among foresight methods, you have forecasting, that's when there's a predictability, you can extrapolate, you can say things about the size of a population, for example. That's very easy for the short, medium term. And then we have this space where it's less predictable but not completely hopeless. There we do different views of the future and try to have some plausible alternatives so we can know what is the set of likely conditions that we need to take into account. But then we can also start with the future and say, now it's 2032. You are you are the manager of the most successful bank in Europe. What happened? What did you do? And then you start to use the mental modules for recall, explanation, and so on, instead of trying to think ahead and see how things lead to certain effects. If you look ahead, if you think ahead, we are very prone, or we are very prone to imagine problems, constraints, difficulties, and very narrow about utility, usually, conservative. And that served us well. We survived because we are risk averse. We think about all the horrible things that might go wrong. But if we want to have a nice dinner, like with friends, 2 weeks from now, we might start thinking about how would this nice dinner be like? What would it be? Well, maybe we cook food together and so on. And then we look backwards. Okay, for us to be able to do this, I need to shop on Thursday, I need to clean on Friday, I need to invite friends the Thursday before that, and it's much more neutral, right? Or even a little bit optimistic, hopefully. So looking for something that it has already happened, trying to figure out backwards the path, right? We talked about this path, the development path of the ecosystem. If we assume that we are in the future and look backwards, we can see that there is such a path, and create a nice understanding on how things can co-evolve over time, how this ecosystem could form. So this is called backcasting. And among the different versions of backcasting, and Martin Wendel, who invented this one, and I have written a paper about it that you have in the course web as a handout. It's not published yet, so you can't spread it. Among these different ways of working with backcasting, there's something that we call sequential backcasting. And we will try that, and we'll try that on the case of self-driving cars. So it goes through certain steps here. The first is to look at today, then the future, and then we find out what is the key actors and their expected responses, and then we can look at how that manifests itself now, in the future, and then in the intermediate phase. And then we can identify triggers that make the whole system go from an early experimental stage to a more like semi-implemented stage, and then to the fully implemented stage. So we take a technology that exists today and we ask ourselves, how will this look when this is fully implemented in society, like self-driving cars? When self-driving cars are as common as they will be, and really a part of it, part of the traffic situation and all that, fully, what would that look like? And the fun thing is that once you have that done and looked at triggers and drivers and all that, it becomes much easier to define what would be a realistic time. When will a company that employs people to deliver packages be at a competitive disadvantage, let's say?
Maybe in
10 years, yes.
2030?
But I think to some degree it's already happening.
Yeah, well,
The introduction of these automatic deliveries.
Yeah, and we see attempts, and often you have these S-curves, and the inflection point is difficult to predict, and that's what we're doing now to some extent. All right, so that's basically it for the model here. So let's see. Here's your chart, and what you do when you want to build a strategy is that you take this vision of the future. Let's say that if we want to make a business strategy, we say, okay, in the self-driving car ecosystem, we want to be the leading car as a service actor. That's the mountaintop we want to climb in the future. We want to own this. There are other positions here, but we want to own this one. And we play the game and say, it's now 2050 and we have this position and we can set the rules for other actors and own the platform everybody has to use. What happened to put us there? And we can put in here, there's some events that happened, some competitors did certain things, regulation, cooperations, we did standards, right? We influenced the standards so we would benefit for what we for. And then some of the things that we list here, there's some things that we need to take action to secure, and others will fall out in our favor, so we'll just monitor them and make sure nothing goes wrong. And some are more difficult to assess. Who is going to be doing what? We need to investigate more. And this actually is giving us a list of things needed to get here that we can put in a sequence. And we can also identify points where it can go wrong and what we do if it does go wrong, and how will we see if it's going to go wrong. It's called the early warning system. And that is the backbone of a strategy. So we build a strategy from the future back. And this is how you solve a labyrinth. If you have a maze, if you've done this on the paper, so it's better to start from the end and go backwards than trying to figure out the way. Because you have to go into dead ends and back and learn by mistakes. So it's a clever strategy formation technique that makes you more long-term focused, clear vision that everybody understands. You know the path, you have path insight, not only, we do this and we might have a 80% chance of succeeding. We know how the path looks and where it can go wrong, so we can have a proactive strategic management for our company. So this is a paper I'm writing now for California Management Review, how to use backcasting to be more agile than the most responsive company you can find, because you're proactive, not responsive.
Right. When are you going to publish that one?
I sent it in, but they extended the deadline, so I get more time to polish it. Actually, if you want to read it, you can give me feedback.
Yeah, put it.
There's another backcasting paper in your course web, and that has this sequential and 4 other kinds of backcasting, which is used. One is using negative scenarios. So it's now 2050 and we failed. What happened? All right. So that's pretty useful if you want to do a risk analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we going to use that one for the next preparation of the next session, or no?
Paper?
Yeah.
No, you read it. It's like a additional.
It's additional
recommended.
material.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Right. So if we can pause can you pause my recording, please?